how does like Anglofuturism, how does this future gleaming Britain, how does that differ from what the future looks like in, I mean, well, obviously America, but Germany, Cambodia, anywhere?
Well, because we are British. So the idea that we would want Britain to sort of just fade into the background of some future sort of feudal style system where we receive apps and we receive consumer devices from abroad seems to me a rather tragic one. I would much prefer a world where Britons are producing the future and can be both prosperous because they are exporting what they make to the world, but also one in which the values, the moral, the ethic of Britain is one that is also exported.
Who now has anything to say about the deindustrialization of this country?
Georgian townhouses on the moon.
The highest GDP per capita in the Milky Way.
Small modular reactors under every village green.
This is Anglofuturism.
Welcome back to the King Charles III space station. I'm Tomo.
And I'm Calum Drysdale.
And what a few days it's been, Calum. Fame at last. A form of fame. I suppose we should also say hello to the operatives surveilling us.
Yeah, well, for those who are not aware, we have been outed as the intellectual wing of a new dangerous craze that is sweeping the country.
And listeners, be warned, that craze is Anglofuturism.
You'd better start believing in Anglofuturism because you're listening to one.
So a bit of context for those listeners who are not studious readers of Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate is a sort of it's basically a sort of non-governmental organization which houses a charity. And the charity is purportedly anti-fascist, and its bread and butter these days. Its history goes back into the 80s, but the bread and butter is sort of infiltrating sort of vaguely right-wing circles, waiting for someone to say something fruity, and then writing a report where everyone is tarred, and where like every reform voter is a sort of fascist in their eyes.
I think actually, Tom, you're being rather generous to them. They have. If you look back, they have been repeatedly found guilty of libel for kind of making up these threats and these plots. So creating the idea that half of Thatcher's government were actually in cahoots with Nazis, and then there was variously that I think
this would have been Searchlight rather than Hope
This was
Not
Searchlight.
Hate, right?
This was Searchlight,
the predecessor.
But and then also I think at the Southport riots as well, there was the suggestion they informed the police and the security services that vast battalions of masked thugs were preparing.
Are we
to
one
rise
of the
up.
battalions?
I would like to think that I could maybe fit into a battalion, but I fear my sort of effete ways and artful lounging.
I think I could pick you out of a group of masked thugs within a split second.
As I sort of toss my what do they call it? Well, like my leather jacket, sort of casually over
your
over
Harrington
one
jacket.
Go out on the street in my driving gloves.
I can't see you swapping your curls for a buzz cut. Frankly,
no. My girlfriend would be very disappointed. She already finds my activities bizarre enough, because ultimately, right, it is farcical that we, frankly, a tiny podcast, two of us who did this because we think it's funny.
No. The price. So, okay, context for listeners. Hope Not Hate are trying to. They were doing a hit piece on Robert Jenrick, who was speaking at Tory conference, and he said a few months ago that he was an Anglofuturist, and so They looked up everything that they could to do with Anglofuturism and found the sort of fruitiest quotes that largely don't come from our podcast, brought us into it. But the way that these hit pieces work is that in order to bring someone in, you have to sort of play up how significant they are. And so the price of doing business with our reputation here has been to make out that we are perhaps the most intellectual vision of the movement.
Well, I think
just delighted you. I remember, we were sent the report, and I was a little worried because, obviously they wouldn't mind if it sort of ruined our careers, right? If they imply that we're neo-Nazis.
I think that they might even enjoy it.
Very, very swiftly, a smile crept across Mr. Drysdale's face. Because although his career was in jeopardy, he had been called part of the most intellectual vision of the movement, and that on aggregate was enough to make his afternoon.
Well, Tom, it's so rare that people, when they use that word around me, don't affix pseudo in front of it. I'm willing to take the upside here with the down.
And look, I'm conscious speaking now that Harry Schuckman or someone will be reading our transcripts, and so first of all I want to say hello. I hope you've enjoyed all the many hours of planning policy chats that you've had to wade through to find anything kind of remotely spicy.
Yeah, I'm sorry. We
wait till you hear our interview with the Track Boys, which is like 2 hours of planning. But I can assure you there are some crypto racist comments.
But they're right at the end. They're right at the end.
No, we're not going to tell you where they are.
No, they are. They're right at the end. Oh, sorry. They're interspersed randomly throughout, so you have to listen to the whole thing.
And no, who knows? Maybe the thatch is bugged. We don't know. But I do sort of feel for them. I'm not really taking the piss, because it's a slightly terrifying world if you think that any skepticism of immigration is fascism. Like these people think that like everyone who votes for reform is a fascist. Like I think the Reform Party is part of their sort of handbook of like the sort of fascist right.
Well, I was pleased. So I was again, as now a public intellectual, and I would like everyone now to refer to me as such. I was on Times Radio today, and the clip of it got posted afterwards. And I said things basically along the lines of, I think the future, I would like it if the future were made in Britain, and was met by, what total Wally, where does all this come from? Which admittedly I am fairly familiar with getting that kind of reaction. But it was,
this is the tall poppies thing in action. One day Hope Not Hate is putting you on a pedestal. The next day Hugo Rifkin is swiping it away from under your feet.
Well, Tom, I do hang out in pretty elevated circles.
Does
these
one
days.
Interview? You can't stop talking about it.
Elevated circles these days. So you can all wait for my you can all look out for my solo career that I will be launching now that I am such a household name.
But I thought you did great, not least because I think you talked about space or something, and then Hugo Rifkin sort of Britpoppily sneered, where he sneered Britpoppily across the studio, like, won't you be sending Paddington up there? And Calum said,
listeners, I said,
No.
which I thought was perfect, because this stuff can be so easily siloed into this kind of landfill of twee. You and I perhaps even lapsed towards the twee in our earlier visions of Anglofuturism.
Now we have such a robust and non-twee vision. I'm glad we've got past that.
And you know what? There is a much more Anglofuturist bear or bear-like creature than Paddington. Yeah, this is what we were discussing with Loic Fremont, a friend of the show.
Go on, tell me, Tom.
So as you know, we've been building this theory that the actual Anglofuturist settler animal, not Paddington, illegal immigrant, but Pingu. Pingu is not an illegal immigrant. He's a settler. The Straussian reading.
He's not a settler. He's autochthonous.
Well,
He's a child of the soil.
Firstly, there is no soil on Antarctica.
There's rock that could.
there's-
There
may-
would have
maybe-
been soil.
maybe there-
would have been soil there because when it was part of Pangaea.
Calum's holding his drink aloft in a kind of very confident manner at this point. I'm sure there's some kind of prehistoric remnants of soil buried deep beneath the ice. But my point is that it's very clear that a Straussian reading of the Pingu show would elicit the clear interpretation that Pingu is about English settlement of Antarctica. I mean, look at the sort of nuclear family that he's got. This is a kind of Northern European invention. Right? He should not be thought of as a penguin. This is a settler family. And he's a third generation. Like there are like at least 3 Pingu grandparents. Loic said a funny thing. He said, "Pingu is the one true Anglo cartoon character, not that foreign bear." And Harry Shokman, I'm quoting rather than endorsing. But Loic goes on about Pingu: indomitable, curious, restless, resourceful. Through his individualism, he bends nature to his will and brings civilization to the blank slate of the unforgiving wasteland.
The first thing that Rhodes said when he arrived on the Cape was "Noot noot."
Was what?
Sorry, I'll say it again. "Noot noot."
To be born on British Antarctica is to win second prize in the lottery of life.
That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast. That's the sound of the police. That's the sound of the beast. That's the sound of the police.
Anyway, Calum, on your appearance on Times Radio, for some reason you didn't bring up what I think is another exciting Anglo-futurist project, which is rebuilding the castles.
No,
Maybe you thought that having talked about O'Neill cylinders, you could only get away with 1 or 2 very wacky ideas.
Yeah, I was. The credit to Peter Haig, who has been chewing my ear off about these. So it goes to show that if you talk about one idea repeatedly for long enough, people will actually start listening and take you up on it. So bravo to him. Yeah, no, I didn't. And this is the idea, Tom, that we should, unlike what we've currently done, which is leave the ruins of abbeys and castles as Gothic and evocative monuments to our past. We should instead rebuild them and make them centers of learning and culture. What is that? Is that about right? Is that a fair summary?
Yeah, pretty much. So this is the Pendragon Foundation, which is a kind of newly founded charity that wants to rebuild castles. And clearly there are kind of so many obstacles to doing this, not least planning law, one of our favorite things on this podcast. But they're inspired by another organization that does this in France. And so they've sort of rebuilt 3 kind of crumbling chateaus. And their hope is that we can do the same. This is an amazing country for castles, and many of them, as you say, are in disrepair, like Ludlow Castle, Nunney Castle, Dunstanburgh Castle.
Do we actually have a lot of castles? Because I thought I saw a map of the castles of Europe, and I thought it was a slightly mix of, because we were sort of safer, it was safer than Europe, and because we centralized sooner, there was less of a need for lords to have big castles. And then I think they also read something about a lot of castles were then slighted, so they were deliberately weakened to mean that
in the Civil War.
I don't know about the Civil War.
Some of that happened in the Civil War.
Okay, I don't specifically know. I think there might have also been a medieval king. I can't actually.
Okay, then my claim is one of quality rather than quantity. We have the best castles, and we certainly have a bunch of those castles that will one day become the Welsh steppe. On the border between Wales. This is like a real deep cut for people who've been with us from episode 1 onwards. But there are plenty of like really, really fantastic Norman castles there.
And so the vision is what? That you build them, they become kind of centers of learning? Because I think there is the argument, like what the Japanese do, right? Which is when rebuilding, sorry, I should say, a lot of their shrines and being very unsentimental about buildings, the Japanese are very good at maintaining both traditional crafts, but also improving them. So it's not like an exhibition, or what we're always complaining about. It's not Museum Island. There are people who have consistent work as wood carvers or I don't know. You know what? My knowledge of Japanese craftsmanship, I think, if I were to attempt to list more, would verge into stereotype.
Okay, well, let me rescue you from this thought by answering your earlier question, which is that the Pendragon Foundation wants to turn these rebuilt castles into cultural centres, roughly the kind that they might have been in their heyday. So some of them, they say, will be living museums, tourist attractions with jousting and archery, medieval crafts and historical festivals. Others might support businesses like breweries, farming, fishing, beekeeping, renewable energy, cultural activities, and more, they say. So, they want to keep the options open. I think it will be hard to... I mean, castles are very expensive to maintain, right? So I think this will be a big challenge to keep them going.
Isn't it? Is this like that theme park in the south of France? The reactionary theme park. Have you come across this?
No.
this fantastic place in France.
Sounds like a terrible idea.
Yeah, sorry, Harry. Keep listening. This is where it gets good. The reactionary theme park where you can go and sort of cheer the King of France and like spit on a picture of Napoleon, and there's jousting and sort of similar idea. And I was with some friends trying to imagine what a British version of this might look like. You sort of stand on the dock and an animatronic Charles II comes in and everyone sort of goes, hurrah!
Charles the Martyr.
No, that's Charles I.
No, I know. Well,
oh. Well, of course we could then. Yeah, we could go and you could do hunting down the regicides. That could be a fun game. But because I think there were also talks about doing one of those in England. But this is a separate one. This is a separate idea.
I think we should certainly have our own reactionary park in a castle. I think that the contrast with Japan is very interesting. It has struck me while visiting Roman ruins in the past, both here and in Europe, that it's such a shame that they've fallen into disrepair. And you might say that's part of the story, but often the ruins are ruins for very, very mundane reasons, like medieval people or people even after the medieval period just used them as quarries. It's not like a kind of magnificent physical remnant of a battle. It's simply a kind of an emblem of our very casual attitude towards heritage in some ways.
Not necessarily casual in that these were important parts of like a Gothic.
No. If people are using them as quarries, that is casual.
But they are now protected in the form that they are, right?
They are now. But I think this also speaks to the dislocation that we feel from our ancestors on these islands. Do you recall when Alex Burkhart came on the pod, he was talking about the weird wide web, the weird being a kind of Old English word
for magic.
Magic, but also I think it's a funny old word that encompasses kind of a lot to do with the way that we connect to the past. And he sees us as being in a kind of weird wide web, as he called it, with the Anglo-Saxons. And I sense that part of the Pendragon Foundation's philosophy is that it will be good for us culturally to maintain these castles in a way that makes them feel a more real part of our heritage. And I'm fully behind that.
Yes, although they can't.
History doesn't start in the 20th century where like the National Trust begins.
No, I agree with that. But I think they also can't become shrines to the past. Otherwise, that brings us, sinks us ever deeper into this sort of worship of a past or preservation of a past whilst everything rots around us. I mean, in a kind of what's her name, Mrs. Havisham style. Like, we're dressed. Dressed in our wedding gown, everything's rotting around us, but we still live in the memories of yesteryear.
Okay, well, what about St Paul's Cathedral like? Do you think we should keep it as is, or are you kind of adding bells and whistles so that you avoid the Miss Havisham scenario?
Well, I think what's important.
You might say that St Paul's is kind of unpatriotically classical rather than neo-Gothic.
Well, we've just spent a week in Budapest. Budapest.
For non-fascist reasons.
No one was even thinking that, Tom, but they are now.
Yeah, I think. Well, it was for Aaron's birthday.
Aaron
is of course our producer. And I also want to flag our irritation that you and I, Calum, were named in this unflattering report, and Aaron wasn't. So Aaron the Fair, for future reference, is just as robust as us in his views,
and is our sort of our Brian Epstein, you know, pulling the strings. You know, he's actually the one who's told Tom that he has to remain single, you know, in order to
maintain
attract
the appearance of singledom,
in order to attract women who might then, you know, come and listen to the podcast.
Well, we've just put up this episode with Curtis Yarvin, and it's well, I don't want to brag, listeners, but we happy few, you happy few, you've rather multiplied a number, and it's done pretty well. But we looked at the analytics, and I'm sorry to say that the gender breakdown is literally 99% male.
Yeah,
like if you tried, you would struggle to do that. Like if you did a kind of, I don't know, like football tactics video that's like incredibly dry, like it would not be 99% male. What are we doing wrong, Calum?
Well, Tom, maybe we should move into football tactics. But going back to the story of Budapest. I've got to stop saying that. But Aaron told me that was how he said Budapest. That is sort of aggressively classical, and it's rather stale in that how consistent it is. And then we went to Vienna. We went to Vienna for a day trip, and it all felt very, very similar. I think what's so nice about Britain is that we have a mix of all of these things. However, ultimately, bringing me back to this topic of should we preserve St. Paul's? What I would like is that these be living buildings. I think the tragedy again of, you know, Canterbury Cathedral, which recently was in the news because the dean had permitted a sort of 2010s CBeebies style graffitiing of the place in order to, you know, appeal to non-Christians or to make it sort of down with ethnic minorities and things.
Rebellious pensioners.
Well, exactly.
Parishioners there.
Exactly. You know, reaching out and, you know, all these very exciting ideas, but actually alienates a lot of the congregation. Whilst I think it was very misguided, the idea that the building should change and update and become one that moves with the times, I think is right. I think the problem instead is we have a very uncaring. These places have uncaring caretakers who treat it not as a living building, treat it as an ancient thing, and they dislike how static it feels, and so they will they vandalize it. They don't care for that heritage.
I worry that treating these buildings as living buildings will lead to this phenomenon of monstrous carbuncles on the face of an old friend. To quote the patron of our space station, the King. When, you know, some horrible like Norman Foster glass and steel thing gets kind of appended to.
I agree with that. But I think we are living in slightly bizarre and ahistorical times in that we are currently living in an anomaly when the building of an extra wing or an extra part to a building is actually just almost guaranteed to produce an ugly effect. But for most, if you look at a lot of these country homes, they are the product of new wings, of knocking things down, opening up the rooms because that's what's fashionable, or changing them, or redoing the roof. That they are the products of fashions, and often quite fickle fashions. But it's through that changing and responding to people's tastes that they have become so interesting. And I think the challenge is not just to say everything must be fixed in amber. It's to say we can relearn how to make beautiful things again and be once again trusted as the owners and guardians of something like St. Paul's Cathedral, confident in the knowledge that when we build on top of it, we are enhancing, not damaging.
I think I disagree with you somewhat. I think it's sure all this stuff is downstream of fashion to an extent, and you know, in the past, you know, wings were being added, that kind of thing. That said, I think it is quite enchanting when you go to visit some building that is just as it was, or as close as possible to how it was in its heyday, right? When you go and see, I don't know, Ludlow Castle or something, and sure, it's a bit of a ruin, but you can sort of appreciate the effect. Maybe a better example, is one I saw in Mexico earlier this year. And so in Mexico City, formerly Tenochtitlan,
Formerly.
the great temple was razed by the Spanish, and they turned it into a cathedral that is really not that impressive. Like it's, you know, obviously the kind of best in Central South America, but like, you know, bring it to Europe somehow and people would laugh at it. It just doesn't have the kind of finery and ornamentation of, you know, your kind of like Chartres or somewhere like that. But you know, an hour or two outside the city, there's another kind of, you know, pre-modern settlement, and I'm afraid I forget its name. But this was treated as sort of Teotihuacan, I think, is the name. And these were kind of the Aztecs to the Aztecs. This civilization that predated them, and to which they showed great respect. And so, partly because it was isolated, they didn't tear down the building. But this means that
So the Aztecs didn't tear this down, or
the Aztecs didn't. It predated the Aztecs.
The Christians didn't.
The Aztecs didn't, and it was too out of the way for the Christians to sort of ruin it. So it remains.
You mean sacralize it and dedicate it to the one true faith? Sorry, listeners, there was a slip up there.
Will be those desires as they may, Calum. This site is incredible. The temples are the same size as they were, and you can walk in and sort of simulate in your head the feeling of, you know, marching in there, or you know, being dragged in there as like a captive, and like it retains the dimensions that it would have then. It retains the scale, and lots of the stone ornamentation is still there. So these, you know, horrid carvings of like serpent-like creatures, and you know, what else, like monstrous eagles, that sort of thing. And like, you know, here we don't have that kind of architecture, which is for the best.
Well,
I think. But what, you know, what I'm trying to communicate is that there's a spectacle that gives you a sort of element of time travel, and I think it, you know, it'd be very special if we could go to the Parthenon, for instance, and to be in a Parthenon that very closely resembles the one that the ancient Greeks knew, rather than a pile of rubble, rather than you know, sort of modern Parthenon with a kind of horrid kind of 1960s extension or something like that. But you don't want addition to that kind of thing.
You're getting stuck in the post-war forms, and I think I accept what you're saying about it feeling as it were, but I do think that, say, if the Parthenon were rebuilt, it would be, you would be able to get that feeling more from seeing it in use. I think, for example, people who've gone to, I'm about to say Rome and the Vatican, but I will regret, but I dislike using the Roman Church
Papist.
as a model. But you know, it's a very different experience going to Rome.
We have a priest hole in the KC3.
No, we don't. But going to the Vatican is a very different experience because you see it used, and it is used for its original purpose, right? So obviously that would be the ideal thing.
No, I think, you know, I think it's wonderful that you know, 900-year-old churches in Sussex are still used as churches.
But again, this is why they can't, however, cease moving and changing. And actually, I think on your point about the scale and the majesty, what I think it would be wonderful.
Or, it's an intimacy as well. Like,
sure.
Maybe you're like the 30th generation to be married or baptized in the same church.
I accept all of that. But what I would say is, as Samuel Hughes said to us, our building techniques now are extraordinary. What we can physically construct, be that out of glass and steel, or actually, as there was returned to, using structural stone, with our modern techniques and computer-aided design, we could build extraordinary buildings that are part of that lineage, part of that tradition, but are also modern. And there's the cathedral in Paris whose name I'm not going to say. It's not Notre Dame. That is sort of in the kind of second arrondissement. And it's got these astonishing flying buttresses. And flying buttresses are like when you don't have a buttress up against the wall, but you have an arch that sort of pulls away from the wall. And then you have a standing pillar that is freestanding.
I assume all our listeners know what a flying buttress is.
But it's just like incredibly striking effect. And we could think about an architecture that is similarly astonishing, that is not just vertical spire of glass and steel. And I think that's the way. And I think as well, it could also be one when the traditional aspect or the sense of continuity comes through the materials and not through the fabrication techniques. Because I think it is a wonderful thing with robotics, with technology, with automation, that we are able to build these things because we're not relying on just stonemasons with a hammer and chisel. These could be real buildings that people are actually building because they are valuable to them, not as a memento, but as a part of the future.
Yeah, well, maybe it would be the town hall in Tempsford or something like that, and it's based on some medieval design but grander in scale. Or what else? I remember Aris Roussenos, who of course wrote the sort of initial essay on Anglofuturism. Once I think he must have been using some LLM or other to visualize statues of Hengist and Horsa guarding each guarding one side of the Thames estuary, perhaps recalling those statues from Lord of the Rings. Remember those kind of, the Fellowship are in little boats and they turn a corner in this river going through a gorge, and then they see these two like immense stone soldiers, like each holding a kind of hand forward. Some sort of architectural epicry like that would be most enjoyable, I think, in Britain's future.
Yeah, I think I would agree with that.
And of course, we ourselves live in this space station,
which could do with an extra wing.
Yeah, we've been arguing about that. I'm not sure we have the budget. I mean, how do you propose that we build this wing? Like, what sort of design would it have? Surely it's got to be in kind of sympathy with this kind of wattle and daub thing we've got going already.
Exactly. We would use locally sourced regolith. And although I suppose actually given the only other building materials here would be possibly ones that we could create, it would be a sort of regolith and dung wattle and daub sort of hut that we would build next door. The only thing that we could actually.
We're very slowly growing cells of lignin in the lab. We should probably go and check on that lignin and have a break.
You're right. I think it might have grown through one of the windows. So we'll need to do a bit of sort of rearranging, move it around a corner to me to you style action.
Well, we're donning our space helmets, and we'll see you on the other side.
Hello, listeners. This is a free preview episode, and if you want to listen to the full thing, you can subscribe at anglofuturism.co.
And if you go there, you'll also get early previews of guest interviews, occasional bonus episodes, and maybe even, Calum whistling, all that kind of jazz.
Whistling. You'll hear my 3-part rendition of The Men of Harlech.
I think I'm a better whistler than you.
I've never actually gone up against anyone.
But
who would
listeners,
judge?
you will have to subscribe to find out.